In this clip, we'll take a few minutes to learn what normals are, how they affect our textures, and what some strategies are for making sure they work for us and not against us. All right, so let's go ahead and start this conversation off by just asking the question, what are normals? This may be something that maybe it's a new term for you as an artist. So the definition of normals is they are theoretical lines that run perpendicular to the surface of a polygon. Now, Maya uses these normals to determine the front and the back of a face or a polygon, as well as how the edges of faces will appear when Maya shades them. Now, with that said, there really are two different types of normals that are associated with your mesh. And we're going to illustrate both of them here. So the first type of normal is a face normal. Now, this is the one that Maya uses to determine which is the front side of the polygon and which one is the back. The face normal is going to emit or protrude from the front of the polygon. And it usually does that, or at least visually, it's represented to be in the very center of the polygon. And I'll try and do some screen callouts for you here so you can see there's actually a small green line growing out of the center of this face normal. Now, the other type of normal inside of Maya is a vertex normal. And the other two images we have here are both illustrations of what these vertex normals could look like. Now, there's two different states you can think of for vertex normals. There can be a vertex normal that is soft, or it's averaged. And then there is a vertex normal that is hard, or is not averaged. So vertex normals grow out of a vertex. And where there's a situation where four polygons meet at a single vertex, there is actually four different vertex normals that come out of that vertex. If that vertex has been hardened, then each one of those vertex normals is going to be perpendicular to the face that it belongs to. So you can see that in the image on the right. There's four little green lines that are running out of this vertex. Now, again, this is telling Maya how that edge, or at least that edge between this vertex and the next vertex, how that edge is going to be shaded. So in a hardened state like this is going to produce facets in the shading of the mesh. Now, if we average or soften the vertex normal, it's going to look like a single green line, but in reality, there's all four of those vertex normals have been averaged and occupy the exact same direction. So this is going to tell Maya to render that transition between two faces as a soft edge. So there's not going to be that faceting. All right, great. So with that said, let's talk about how we can manage vertex normals prior to texturing. Because as a texture artist, you may not have been the artist that modeled the asset that you're texturing. And in a case like with this Swords and Shovels hero, the normals needed some adjustment when this asset was handed off to me. So let's go ahead and talk about why it's important first to understand these mesh normals. The mesh normals can drastically impact the overall quality of the normal map that we're about to bake over inside a Substance Painter. Let me show you an example here. So I have two images here. In this image on the left, there has been some selective hardening and softening for the vertex normals. The UVs for this particular image have been separated at the explicitly defined hard edges. So anywhere I've come in and said, this edge needs to be hardened. Now this image on the right is a completely softened or averaged vertex normals for the entire mesh. So there are no explicitly defined hard edges here. Now, I know it's a little hard to see inside these two small images, so let me just make those a bit larger for you here. This way I can point out some of the problems that exist in the image on the right. I'll use some screen callouts here to do that. So if you look along these edges here, there's sort of this strange dark shading that's appearing just on one side of that edge. Again, this is because this edge is been recorded as a softened edge in the game mesh, but indeed it really needed to be hardened for the baking of the normal map because we're getting some problems with the bake. All right, great. So with that said, let's go ahead and talk about how we can achieve the best results when it comes to normals and beginning to manage these as we start to texture our asset. So here's some rules that I follow for best results, and you should probably think about these and maybe implementing a similar process for yourself. So first, I'm going to start from either a completely softened or a completely hardened state with my asset. Now, the determining factor there is whichever the majority of my edges will be. If it's a character or some kind of an organic asset, then more than likely most of my edges are going to need to be softened or averaged. If it's some kind of a mechanical asset, a piece of machinery or something like that, maybe we start from a hardened state. So after we have started from that state, we're going to use our high-res mesh and identify edges that may need to be explicitly hardened or softened. So this is where subjectivity comes into play here. And there may be a little bit of trial and error on your part, depending on the asset that you're working on. So you'll want to apply these explicit vertex normal modifications to the GameRes mesh. And you're going to do that over inside of Maya or whichever 3D application that you're used to. And lastly, you're going to ensure that your UVs have been cut or separated along explicitly hardened edges. All right, great. So with that said, let's go ahead and in our next clip, we're going to bounce over to Maya and we're going to begin to implement what we've learned here by learning how we can modify the normals for our game mesh.